Bubba Scrubba, Culture War Commentary, Volume 4, Episode 4. Barker. Is the Pentagon running out of money? Pete Hegseth was on the Hill yesterday or the day before, begging for an emergency $80 billion allocation in order to continue to fund the operations in Iran. And it makes you wonder, you go, okay, so the Defense Department, again, it's the Defense Department, it's not the Department of War. They have almost $1 trillion budget. Obviously, there are procurement programs in place that have already had money allocated. They have to continue funding, including the next generation of ballistic missile submarines to replace the aging Ohio class, and the B-21 Raider, the next generation heavy bomber that's going to replace the B-2 Spirit. Now, these are obviously necessary, if not insanely expensive programs, if only so that we can maintain a credible nuclear triad. But there are so many other boondoggle programs, such as these Trump battleships that he wants to develop. Now, to be fair, this is just an idea. I don't think there's been any meaningful money spent on this, but anybody who knows anything about current naval warfare and tactics knows that giant battleships, or even aircraft carriers for that matter, are now becoming obsolete due to the fact that they're easily targeted by hypersonic missiles, drones, etc. And so I think they're slated to produce something like 10 Gerald Ford class aircraft carriers. Obviously, there's no other country in the world that operates, I think, more than 2. We currently have over 10, but only one. That's the new supercarrier model. I'm assuming that the Department of Defense will end up cutting that procurement back by at least a half a dozen in order to, 1, save money, and 2, because of the fact that, again, these are obsolete weapons of war. But it just makes you wonder that the current administration, being run by these clowns, a guy like Hegseth, who was he was an officer but an Army reservist, and was a Fox News host before being appointed Secretary of Defense, shows you that this guy has no real institutional knowledge of how this organization works, how bloated it is, how, like a giant ship, it can't be turned on a dime, it's not nimble. And that's something that previous secretaries have struggled with, was how to strip down the organization, modernize it, and make it more nimble, because that's the future of warfare. But this guy, I mean, he was selected because he's a talking head and he's photogenic. He gets in front of the cameras and says all the right things, talking about the war fighters and the lethality of our fighting forces and so on and so forth. But it's all a smokescreen. He's a know-nothing, useful idiot for a guy like Trump. And ultimately, this is what's going to bury our country. Yes, Trump in and of himself is an existential danger. But in his first administration, he was at least semi-constrained by professional politicians or people in the business world who had a brain and realized that what he wanted to do was not necessarily feasible, and that there were constraints that you had to work within, just like our political process. But this new administration are just stocked with sycophants and people who don't have a brain in their head and will just execute any order, no matter how bizarre. And so, I think that's the real danger right now to this country, is the lack of guardrails. Now, $80 billion is not an insignificant sum, but by the current measure, we're spending $1 billion a day to fund operations to continue to bomb this country. And that's another issue, is apparently that we're running out of bombs. maybe not the general cluster munition, you know, whatever, but these smart bombs, the ones they use to like target a factory and try to minimize the amount of collateral damage because it has such a precise targeting system. But these weapons are in short supply now. And so I guess even though publicly they're saying, well, there's no shortage of our stockpiles, the only reason that you would go back to Congress and say we need emergency funding is because you need that money to go back to the munitions makers and say you need to start producing more of these bombs. Double time. Chop, chop. So that we can either use them on Iran or at least have some more in our stockpile and hope to God that somebody doesn't try to bomb us in the meantime. Obviously, again, our nuclear triad does rule out any real major potential military action. But yeah, I guess one piece of advice would be invest in defense contractors because they're getting tons of money. Although I will say a word to the wise, I invested in Northrop Grumman and I bought it at $700 something a share and it's down into the 500s. I've really lost a lot of money on that particular one. But as a rule, generally in this administration. But yeah, this war, this conflict, there is no exit. I fear that the only exit, and now there I hear rumblings, there's rumblings that they might actually consider using tactical nuclear weapons as a way to try to end this thing. Obviously, that would be a catastrophic result for not just the country, not just the region, but the world at large. That being said, there is a doctrine that is out there. It's called the no first use, and many countries have signed it, basically saying that they would never be the first ones to use nuclear weapons. The United States, for obvious reasons, has never signed this, and so it leaves us open to using nuclear weapons in a first strike capacity. I honestly hope that this is not where this ends up going. We don't need a weapon or a world with more nuclear weapons. But that makes me segue into the next big piece of news, which is that the Trump administration has given their blessing to the country of Saudi Arabia to start enriching uranium, to start their own nuclear program. And I mean, if this doesn't, first of all, this is a brain dead decision, but it is so stupid on its face that it makes you wonder that this is not some kind of quid pro quo. Obviously, the Trump family and administration is in bed with Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the de facto ruler of that country. The same guy that had that Muslim American journalist murdered and chopped up and then denied the whole thing and still got invited to the Oval Office. Now, for many, many years, the Saudi kingdom has been, is the word indispensable right? I don't know. But an ally to the United States, hosts military bases. Obviously, we get some sweetheart deals on exported oil. In return, they get weapons systems, most favored nation status. But makes you wonder that if the Trump administration is taking this drastic of a stance as it pertains to them now, potentially starting a nuclear weapons program, what's in it for them? There's nothing in it for us, that's for sure. If anything, this is just going to continue to embolden Iran, as these are basically the two great powers and loathe each other. As the Saudis fancy themselves, the leader, the preeminent power of the Sunni Muslim world, the Iranians are the preeminent power of the Shiite Muslim world. And if you know anything about the Muslim religion, the Sunnis and the Shiites hate each other. So, obviously, it serves another purpose, which is to antagonize the Iranians by saying, oh yeah, Saudi Arabia, it's okay, go after a bomb. Start your own program. Obviously, the other, well-known thing is that Osama bin Laden and a lot of the people that were involved in the 9/11 terrorist attacks were Saudi nationals. People say, well, why would they do that? They're our allies. No, they're not. The Saudis hate us just as much as any other Muslim country. They're just smart enough to realize that if they put on a good face and be nice to us, that we'll be nice back to them. And so they've leveraged that and taken advantage of that relationship now for decades. Anyway, just another day in the Trump administration in this dystopian nightmare. Talk to you guys soon.